my girl. How was this happening?
This was supposed to be, like, the best week of their lives. Senior trip to Myrtle Beach, the ocean, the parties, that smell of youth and freedom in the air. She was laughing, and he was looking at her like no one else even existed. Once, they loved each other. Now, they were just friends. At least, that's what everyone thought. But when the sun came up over the Atlantic on June 7th, 2023, one of them would never wake up again.
911, what side is the emergency?
Hi, my name is Addison, and I'm out in Myrtle Beach right now for our senior trip. And our friend is passed out on the floor right now, and she's ice cold, and she's very blue.
They found Natalie Martin unconscious in a rented condo. She was still wearing the same clothes she'd had on just a few hours earlier, the ones she wore while laughing at the concert. Her friends tried to save her, but it was already too late. No signs of forced entry, no strange fingerprints, and only one person in the room, her ex-boyfriend. He was just sitting there, silent. His hands were scratched, his eyes empty. He kept saying the same thing over and over. Natalie's not waking up. Police arrived a little after 9 in the morning. And that's when it hit everyone this wasn't some tragic accident. It was a storm of passion, jealousy, and control. Because sometimes, what starts as love ends in darkness when the need to belong to someone turns into the urge to destroy them. Before we dive into this story, do me a quick favor, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and if you feel like it, share it with someone. It really helps keep the channel going and lets us make even more deep dive investigations. And while you're watching, drop a comment and tell me where you're from and what the weather's like outside your window right now. Alright, let's get into it. Fair warning, this story will send chills down your spine. Before everything that happened in Myrtle Beach, Natalie was just Natalie, an 18-year-old girl from a tiny town called Roseville, Ohio. Her days were simple: sunrise by the river, wheat fields stretching for miles, forest trails where she could just be alone with her thoughts. She wasn't looking for drama or some crazy adventure. She loved the small things: the smell of wet earth after rain, the sound of water, the tug of the fishing line when something bit. Natalie wasn't afraid of hard work either. She knew how to handle a hunting knife, how to clean a deer, how to throw out a net for dinner, things people around town usually called men's work. Her friends used to joke, "If you ever need someone to dress a deer, just call Natalie." But beneath that tough, practical side was a softer one, gentle, warm. She worked part-time at a daycare after school, and she just had this gift: she could calm down a crying kid with a few words, like she knew exactly what to say to make them feel safe. Her smile could light up a whole room. When Natalie laughed, it was impossible not to smile back. People around her just seemed to relax, to breathe easier. Her voice was light and full of humor, but never fake or mean. Brooklyn, her best friend, once told reporters, she could pull you out of your darkest day with just her laugh. On the surface, Natalie's life looked full. Photos on her phone showed beaches, hikes, parties with friends. But even in those snapshots, there was something tense. Those closest to her noticed that behind her smile, something was off. She'd get quiet when someone asked about her relationship. She'd check her phone too often, not because she was bored, but because she didn't want to upset anyone. And the reason for that was simple and complicated. Blake Linkus, the guy she'd met back in high school. Small town story. He was the athlete. She was too. They went to games together, shared those after-match first kisses. Everyone saw them as the couple, but those who saw them when no one was watching saw something different. A year or two later, Blake started changing. At first, it was cute, more attention, a few jealous jokes. Then came the questions about every text message. He started timing when she got home, asking who she talked to, commenting on every new follower she had. Her friends remembered it clearly. This wasn't love anymore. It was surveillance. And when Natalie tried to explain, "I'm just hanging out with my team," it didn't calm him down, it only made him more suspicious. She kept trying to believe that people could change, that relationships were worth fighting for. But patience runs out. In March 2023, there was a breaking point. During an argument, one that others actually saw, Blake shoved her. It wasn't some little push. It was the kind that makes you take a step back and burst into tears because you can't believe it just happened. That was the moment she realized this wasn't just emotional anymore. He'd crossed a line. She ended it. She walked away. But walking away didn't mean peace. Blake started calling in the middle of the night, sending texts that mixed begging and threats. He promised he'd change, then demanded she come back. He said he couldn't live without her, and when kindness didn't work, it turned into rage. One of the messages later used as evidence of escalation was sent on May 5, 2023. According to testimony from friends and case records, it said, "If you hate me that much, then find someone else so I can beat the crap out of him and finally calm down." Those words didn't sound like empty threats. People who knew Blake told investigators he had a real history of fights and that he wasn't afraid to use his fists. Natalie's friends started to worry. They said, "This isn't just emotions talking. This sounds like a plan and intention." But Natalie tried to stay calm. She didn't want to ruin anyone's plans or mess up the senior trip her classmates had been organizing for months. She decided to go to Myrtle Beach not to prove a point, but to close that chapter peacefully. That choice was so her. She never wanted her personal drama to spoil anyone else's good time. But sometimes, peaceful doesn't mean safe. And behind every smile, every photo she took, that shadow of control lingered like a crack that could one day turn into a collapse. Natalie didn't want drama. After weeks of stress and arguments, she wanted just one thing: silence. She told her friends she just wanted to finish school, pack her bags, feel the ocean breeze, and stop thinking about the past. That trip to Myrtle Beach seemed like the perfect way to end one story and turn the memories into something good. The senior trip had been planned since spring. Parents chipped in for gas, someone booked the condo, and the group chat was full of jokes about who'd have to wake whom after the parties. For Natalie, it was supposed to be that last celebration of youth, the space between childhood and whatever came next. She packed her bag carefully, her favorite shorts, a school t-shirt, sunscreen, and a little note from her mom: "Be careful and text me." When her friends asked if it would be awkward being there with Blake, Natalie just smiled and said, "It's fine, we're just friends." Brooklyn didn't buy it. She knew that when Natalie said, "It's fine," it usually meant, "I don't want to talk about it." But she didn't push it, and Natalie went. The drive to South Carolina was long, over 10 hours in the heat, with the smell of gas, convenience store coffee, and cheap perfume mixing in the air. They laughed, sang along to music, filmed stories for Instagram. In the back seat, Blake pretended to have fun too, but his eyes stayed cold. Witnesses later said he was drinking from a bottle, making rough jokes, then suddenly asking who Natalie was texting. She tried to laugh it off, change the subject, but his questions kept coming sharper, heavier. One of the guys in the car later told police, "You could feel it like he was about to snap." He was holding it together, but just barely. The first few days in Myrtle Beach felt like a movie. The ocean, that salty air, the sun warm on their skin. They took beach photos, grabbed pizza, threw sand at each other and laughed like little kids. Nobody realized that underneath all that laughter, tension was already building. Blake seemed calm, but something about him had changed. He talked less, stared longer. He noticed every little thing Natalie did. When she texted someone, when she stepped away from the group for just a minute, when she laughed without looking at him. And every time, his jaw clenched a little tighter. Friends said he could sit for hours just staring at the ocean. But that calm, it wasn't real. It was the kind of silence that hums from the inside, like something waiting to explode. June 6th, evening. The city buzzed with tourists. The air smelled like grilled meat and cigarettes. The group headed to the House of Blues, that iconic place off the highway, where live music shook the walls and hundreds of grads danced under the lights. For them, it was supposed to be a night of freedom. No teachers, no grades, just music, lights, and youth. Natalie smiled, sang along, filmed little clips on her phone. Blake stood beside her, but witnesses said he looked distant, like his mind was somewhere far away. Around 10 p.m., Natalie said she wasn't feeling well. She rubbed her temple and whispered to a friend that her head hurt from all the noise. Blake immediately offered to walk her back to the condo. Another friend joined, just in case. The three of them stepped out into the night. The air was humid. The streets glowed with neon lights, laughter, and the echo of music. They walked a few blocks, and when the condo door finally shut behind them, everything went still. The world was celebrating, but inside that condo, something irreversible was already beginning. When the friends came back later, the place felt wrong. The hallway smelled like perfume, with a faint trace of alcohol. But inside the condo, just silence, and the dull sound of waves behind the window. Lights off, TV off, air conditioner off, as if someone had decided the house shouldn't make a sound. They knocked on the bedroom door, once, then again louder. Silence. Someone joked, "They probably just passed out." Another muttered nervously, "Yeah, let's not bother them." No one wanted to be annoying. No one wanted to ruin the moment, so they let it go, and that decision would haunt them for the rest of their lives. According to police reports, after they returned to the condo, Natalie took out her phone and texted someone from back home. Just a short message, nothing serious, nothing that sounded like a fight. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Blake, it was betrayal. He saw her typing, and something inside him snapped. They started arguing. At first it was quiet, almost whispered. Then their voices rose. He accused her of lying, of cheating, of not caring. She stood with her back to the wall and kept saying, "We're not together anymore, Blake. It's over." But to him, those words sounded like a slap, like a challenge. He yelled that he couldn't live without her, that he'd already tried to end his life. Tears, threats, begging, it all blurred together. Natalie tried to calm him down, told him to sit, to breathe, to just stop talking. She didn't yell back. She still believed she could talk him down. But not this time. And within minutes, everything turned into something that could never be undone. He wasn't listening anymore. Her voice faded beneath his breathing. Her words couldn't reach him through the noise in his head. He saw only her face, so familiar, so close. But now it looked different. There was no fear in it anymore. Just exhaustion. What happened next lasted only a few minutes. A few minutes enough to destroy 2 lives, 2 families, 2 towns. Later, experts would say the pressure on her neck lasted about 3.5 minutes. Far too long to be called an accident. By 10:17 p.m., Natalie's phone went silent. Her social media activity stopped. Messages from friends went unread. They wrote, "Where are you? You okay?" But that blue checkmark never appeared. Meanwhile, Blake sat on the floor beside her. The silence in the room was so thick it felt alive. Even the hum of the air felt too loud. He was breathing hard, hands over his face. Then he slowly stood up, grabbed her phone, looked at the screen, and threw it across the room. 40 minutes later, at 11:02, he picked up his own phone and sent a message to his dad. "I got angry and messed everything up. I love you forever. I don't want to do this, but I have to." That was the last message that night. After that, nothing. When the group came back to the condo close to midnight, the atmosphere felt off immediately. Even before they reached the door, they could feel something was wrong. The hallway was unnaturally quiet. No music, no TV. Even the air conditioner was off. There was a faint smell of alcohol, sea salt, and something heavy, the presence of something unseen. The bedroom door was locked from the inside. They knocked once, then again. Silence. Someone tried the handle, it wouldn't move. Then came that ordinary sentence that would later turn into a lifetime of guilt. "They're probably asleep." Someone else whispered, "Leave it." No one wanted to intrude. No one wanted to be that person, so they stepped away. Someone went to the kitchen. Someone fell asleep on the couch. And that night, the condo stayed silent, oppressively, unnaturally silent. Behind the locked door, her body was already there. According to official reports, Blake stayed in that room for hours. He sat there, motionless. The only sound was the faint hum of streetlights through the blinds. Every so often, he'd touch her hand, colder each time. Then he got up, went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stabbed himself in the chest. The wound was shallow, barely more than a scratch. Blood soaked his t-shirt, leaving a dark stain. He sat back down, leaned against the bed, and stayed that way until morning. When the sun rose over the Atlantic, the beach outside came alive again. Friends were waking up, laughing, grabbing towels, talking about where to go for breakfast. Next door, the air was heavy and still. Around 9 a.m., the sound of a lock turning broke the silence. The bedroom door opened. Blake stepped out pale, hollow-eyed, his shirt stained with blood. His eyes were blank, his hands scratched, his neck marked from panic, from guilt, maybe both. He stood in the hallway, repeating in a flat, distant voice, "Natalie's not waking up. Natalie's not waking up." His tone was calm, too calm, like someone who had already crossed a line long ago. The friends ran to the bedroom. Someone screamed. Someone froze in the doorway. One girl shoved Blake aside and rushed inside. Natalie was lying on the floor beside the bed, still in the same clothes as the night before, shorts, a dark tank top, a bracelet on her wrist. Her face looked peaceful, but her arms were stiff, locked in awkward angles, signs that she had fought back. Her friends screamed, tried to wake her. One fell to her knees and started CPR. Another fumbled to dial 911, her fingers shaking so badly she couldn't press the right numbers, until someone grabbed the phone and yelled into it, "She's not breathing. Please, hurry. She's not breathing."
911, what status the emergency?
Hi, my name is Addison, and I'm out in Myrtle Beach right now for our senior trip. And our friend is passed out on the floor right now, and she's ice cold, and she's very blue. Her lips are blue, and she's
Okay, what's
not
the address?
moving
Where are
at
you
all.
at? Where are you at?
Where are we at?
Is this a place at the beach?
Yes.
Is she breathing? Is your friend breathing?
I do not think so. I really cannot tell. She is ice cold,
How long
and
has
she
she been
won't
that way?
move. I don't know. Some of us just woke up.
Okay, I'm sending the paramedics to help you now. Stay on the line. I'll tell you
Okay.
exactly what to do next. I need to know how
Okay.
old she is.
She's 18.
Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Her heart wasn't beating, her skin was cold, her lips had turned blue. Doctors later estimated she'd been gone for hours. While most of her friends were still laughing down on the beach, the sound of ambulance sirens tore through the quiet morning. Myrtle Beach was just waking up janitors washing sidewalks below, and upstairs, in that rented condo, there was only emptiness. When the medics stepped out of the room, one of them just shook his head quietly. No chance. Police from Horry County showed up a few minutes later. 2 officers climbed the stairs, and the second they stepped inside, they knew this wasn't an accident. Clothes scattered on the floor, a nightstand knocked over, scratches on the wall. The bed was pulled apart, pillows on the ground. Everything in that room screamed that there had been a struggle, a short, violent one. Defensive wounds marked Natalie's arms, scratches, bruises on her wrists. She had fought until her very last breath, but she never stood a chance. Blake was sitting right there on the floor, his back against the bed, frozen like stone. He hadn't tried to run. He hadn't even tried to hide anything. His eyes were empty, locked on one spot. There was dried blood on his shirt. At first, medics thought it was hers. Then they noticed a shallow cut on his chest, not life-threatening, barely bleeding. He hadn't even tried to patch it up. When one of the officers, Sergeant Williams, asked what happened, Blake slowly lifted his head and said 5 words. "I killed my best friend. He's Zayd that of God haft." His voice was flat, almost detached. No tears, no emotion, no remorse. Just silence afterward, and the faint sound of waves crashing outside the window. The officers read him his rights and cuffed him. He didn't resist, just stared at the floor. As they led him out of the room, during the search, police collected their phones, the knife, a broken bracelet, and a blood-stained pillow. Those items would later become the key evidence. Less than 24 hours later, 18-year-old Blake Linkus was officially charged with first-degree murder. His mugshot spread across local media, a dazed kid with swollen eyes and a hollow stare. Headlines read, "Ohio teen charged in Myrtle Beach homicide." But for Natalie's family back in Ohio, those words didn't even feel real. Her father, Jesse Martin, was on the road that morning, driving south, trying to reach his daughter's phone. No answer. His wife sat beside him, holding Natalie's photo in her hands, refusing to let go. They still thought she might be in a hospital, that she'd be okay. But the call came from the coroner. Jesse pulled the car over in the middle of the road, stepped out, and fell to his knees on the hot asphalt. "We just lay there on the side of the highway, shaking, realizing we'd never see our little girl again," he later said. His words would be quoted in every local report. For the small town of Roseville, it was like a shockwave. No one could believe it that the bright, smiling girl everyone knew, from the school coach to the grocery clerk, was now part of a police report. South Carolina investigators immediately began collecting evidence. Forensic teams lifted fingerprints, photographed every inch of the room, and sealed items in clear evidence bags. They worked late into the night. The autopsy confirmed what everyone feared. The cause of death was sustained pressure to the neck, mechanical asphyxiation. No drugs, no alcohol. She was sober, fully conscious, alive until the very last moments. The attack lasted over 3 minutes. Investigators didn't sugarcoat it. This wasn't instant, they said. It was deliberate. The story exploded across the country. In a single day, People, Yahoo News, WMBF, and Fox Carolina all picked it up. 2 towns, quiet little Roseville and loud, sun-soaked Myrtle Beach, were suddenly tied together by one tragedy. In one place, parents were crying. In the other, reporters stood outside with microphones. Crowds began gathering outside the courthouse. Friends, former teachers, even complete strangers. Everyone brought yellow flowers, Natalie's favorite color. And back home, on the softball field at Philo High School, where she'd spent so many evenings, kids lined up candles in the shape of her initials, N.M. The candles flickered softly, and on the scoreboard hung a photo. Natalie in her softball uniform, smiling, alive. That silence that night said more than any words ever could. Her best friend, Brooklyn, hadn't gone on vacation that summer. She had a softball tournament. She didn't even know that by that same night, Natalie would already be gone. After hearing the news, she didn't speak for days. She vanished from social media, stopped answering calls, because what could you possibly say? When the world breaks exactly where you were supposed to be? I thought I knew Blake, she told police later. Clearly, I didn't. She sat with her eyes down as she described him, how he'd squeeze Natalie's hand when he got jealous, how he'd hover over her when she laughed with another guy, how her smile would fade whenever he was around. Back then, those things seemed small. Now, they all fit together into one horrifying picture. I could tell he wasn't just jealous, Brooklyn said. He had that look like someone who wasn't going to let go. She admitted she'd often been scared for Natalie. The night before the trip, she even texted her, "You sure you're okay? Just be careful." That message turned out to be the last one they ever exchanged. And now, every word of it cut like a knife. A few days after his arrest, Blake gave his first statement. He was moved into an isolation cell at the Horry County Jail. In the interrogation video, he sat slouched forward, staring at the table. At first, he said nothing. Then finally, he spoke. "We got into a fight over another guy," he said quietly. "I got angry, lost control. I don't remember everything. But prosecutors didn't buy it. They went public immediately. He remembers everything. And his own messages prove it. In his phone, investigators found a string of texts. Jealousy, insults, manipulation. He wrote that she drove him crazy. That if she didn't come back, somebody was going to get hurt. Everyone. All of it sent just weeks before the trip. So those words, "I lost control," sounded less like truth and more like an excuse. At first glance, justice seemed simple. There was a confession, evidence, witnesses, a motive. Police wrapped up the investigation quickly. Everyone thought the next step would be trial and a sentence. But a few weeks later, something happened that even seasoned detectives called a slap in the face of the system. The judge decided to release Blake on bail, $150,000, the price of a new car, for an 18-year-old girl's life. He was ordered to wear a GPS monitor, stay within state lines, and have no contact with Natalie's family. The decision shocked everyone. Officers who'd been at the crime scene told reporters, off camera, they'd never seen a first-degree murder suspect walk free for that amount. He walked right out the front doors of the courthouse. One officer said, "While we were still finishing the paperwork." For the Martin family, it was another blow. After death came the weight of helplessness. Standing outside his Roseville home, Jesse Martin told reporters, "When a judge bangs a gavel, and for the price of a used SUV, the man who killed your daughter gets to go home for 635 days. That's not justice." He couldn't wrap his head around it. How a guy who admitted to strangling his daughter could sleep in his own bed. And that's exactly what Blake did. He went home. For almost 2 years, he lived a normal life. Ate his mom's cooking, walked the dog, drove down the same streets where he used to hold Natalie's hand. He even enrolled in a short online college course. Meanwhile, the Martin family woke up every morning knowing their daughter was in the ground and her killer was under the same roof as his parents. It was slow torture, not just for them, but for the entire town. At the grocery store, people looked away when her name came up. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew he was free, but the law was on his side. The trial was set for March of 2025. The Martin family packed their suitcases and drove south, back to the same state where their daughter had died. The drive felt endless. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. That morning, as the hearing began, Blake stood in the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit, pale, lost, and hollow-eyed. When Judge Deidre Jefferson asked, "What is your plea, Mr. Linkus?" he answered softly, "Guilty." 3 words that changed everything. No trial, no witnesses, no cross-examination, just a sentence. The courtroom was packed. Natalie's parents, her friends, her teachers, even Blake's family all sat in silence. Some cried quietly, others just stared at the floor, their hands clenched together. The air felt thick, heavy like right before a storm. Prosecutor Scott Hickson stepped up to the stand and began reading the evidence, the messages, the photos, the forensic reports, the witness statements. His voice was steady, but cold. This wasn't a moment of anger, he said. This was obsession. This was jealousy, control, and the fear of losing what he thought was his. The judge nodded slowly, and the soft sobs of Natalie's mother broke through the stillness. Then the defense attorney, Francis Humphrey, stood up. He talked about Blake's youth, about autism spectrum disorder, about alcohol, about remorse. He's sorry, he understands, he's broken, the lawyer said. But the words fell flat. For the Martin family, it was just noise. The kind of noise that tries to smother pain, but only makes it louder. The silence that followed felt eternal. Everyone in the room knew it. Justice was coming, but far too late. Brooklyn, Natalie's best friend, stepped up to the podium. Her hands trembled. The paper she held was already crumpled before she spoke. She looked straight at Blake just a few feet away. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. 3.5 minutes. That's how long it took him to take her life. 3.5 minutes where he could have stopped. The room went still. Even the court stenographer paused mid-typing. Only a quiet sob from the back row broke the silence. Brooklyn wiped her tears, took a breath, and added, "He didn't stop, and I'll never forgive myself for not going with her. I should have been there." Then Jesse Martin, Natalie's father, approached the stand. He didn't need notes. He stood tall, hands clasped, and every word came out like it was cut from pain itself. "There's nothing you can say to make this easier. Justice isn't words. Justice is when she's here again, standing beside us." He paused, looked at the judge, then straight at the defendant. His voice dropped to a quiet, steady growl. "If I could smell the burn of his hair, then maybe I'd feel peace." Say, his wife broke into tears. Some people turned away, unable to handle the rawness. It wasn't vengeance, it was grief that had nowhere left to go. Judge Jefferson left the bench to deliberate. Half an hour later, she returned. Everyone stood, even Blake, pale and shaking, clutching his hands like he was trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. Her voice was firm, calm, and cold. "The minimum sentence for murder is 30 years. But under these circumstances, minimum is not justice." A long pause. The microphone clicked. You could hear every breath in the room. "The court sentences you to 45 years in prison, without the possibility of parole." Blake lowered his head. His shoulders trembled, whether from tears or relief. No one could tell. He whispered, barely audible, "She was the love of my life. I swore I'd protect her, and I failed." Natalie's parents didn't respond. They just sat there, holding each other's hands, silent. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Yellow ribbons, her favorite color, the color of her graduation, were tied to railings, trees, even police barricades. Some people held signs with her picture. Others just stood quietly, watching as Blake was escorted to the van. When he passed, a few voices shouted, "Murderer! Monster!" He never looked up. Jesse Martin stepped toward the cameras and spoke simply, "This doesn't bring peace, because real justice would be her standing here again." His voice broke, but he kept going. "I want every parent to hear this. If you see your child in trouble, do something. Don't wait until it's too late." Brooklyn stood beside him. Her eyes were red, but she stood tall. Looking straight into the camera, she said, "I'm glad there wasn't a trial, but every time I close my eyes, I still see her smile. I still hear her laugh." Back home in Ohio, life didn't go back to normal. Weeks after the sentencing, the school held a memorial night. On the softball field where Natalie had spent so many hours, hundreds of candles lit up the diamond, and photos of her hung across the stands, with a ball in her hand, smiling, wearing her team colors. The GoFundMe that Brooklyn started raised over $30,000, mostly from strangers, people who'd never met Natalie but were touched by her story. Some left notes with just a few dollars, writing, "For Natalie, the girl we never knew but wish we had." Her obituary said it simply, "A free, wild, and beautiful soul." She was only 18, and those who loved her say, she never got the chance to become the person she was meant to be. Today, if you drive through Duncan Falls, you'll see banners with her name, yellow ribbons tied to fences, and a small memorial on the softball field, where she once stood behind home plate. Every June, when the sun dips behind the trees, people still gather there, with flowers and candles. No speeches, just silence. Because this story isn't just about Natalie, it's about every girl who thinks jealousy is love, about everyone who mistakes control for care, and about how easily all of it could have been avoided. Control is not love. Jealousy is not devotion, and none of this had to happen. Be careful out there, and I'll see you next time.